Nobody taught them. There was no school, no book, no person who understood what agriculture was and decided to invent it. There was no single morning when someone woke up, looked at the ground, and thought, I will grow food here instead of finding it. That is not how it happened. What actually happened was slower, stranger, and in many ways more remarkable than any deliberate invention. It happened across thousands of years, across multiple continents simultaneously, through a process that looked less like discovery and more like the world and the human brain gradually finding each other. And it changed everything that came after. For the first 2.5 million years of human existence, nobody farmed, nobody needed to. The earth was full of things to eat, and humans were extraordinarily good at finding them. They knew which plants grew where. They knew which seasons brought which foods. They knew the landscape the way modern people know their own homes. Every corner, every hiding place, every reliable source. Hunter-gatherers were not wandering randomly through an unfamiliar world. They were experts moving through a territory they had studied for generations. Then something changed, and the change didn't come from inside the human mind. It came from the climate. Around 12,000 years ago, the Earth came out of the last ice age. Temperatures rose, rainfall patterns shifted, the landscapes that had supported hunter-gatherer populations for millennia began to change beneath their feet. Some areas became more fertile, some dried out. The animals that populations had depended on for generations moved or declined. The stable, reliable world that human knowledge had been built around became unstable. And in several places across the Earth, independently, without any contact with each other, human groups began doing something they had never done before. They started staying in one place. This is the part most people miss. Farming did not cause settlement. Settlement came first, and settlement happened because certain environments were so naturally abundant that there was no reason to leave. The Fertile Crescent, the arc of land running through what is now Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel, was one of these places. Wild grains grew there in dense natural stands. Wild animals were plentiful. A group could settle in one location and find everything it needed within walking distance. And when you stay in one place long enough, you start to notice things. You notice that grain falls from the plant when it is ripe. You notice that some of it falls near the camp and sprouts the following season. You notice that the plants that grow near where you discard food scraps are larger than the ones in the wild. You notice over years and generations that the ground around your settlement produces more food than the wild ground further away. You are not yet farming, but you are watching, and watching, across enough time, becomes understanding. The first deliberate act that looks like farming was probably not planting. It was protection. Humans began protecting the plants they valued, clearing competing vegetation, preventing animals from grazing on them, moving them away from areas that were about to be built on. They were not yet growing food, they were managing it, making the wild a little less wild, making the reliable a little more reliable. Then came the accidental selection that changed everything. Wild wheat has a feature called shattering. When the grain is ripe, the seed head breaks apart and the seeds scatter. This is how the plant reproduces itself. It is excellent for the plant. It is terrible for a human trying to harvest. You approach the plant, it shatters, and most of the grain falls to the ground before you can collect it. But occasionally, by random genetic mutation, a plant grows that does not shatter. Its seeds stay attached to the stem when ripe. From the plant's perspective, this is a catastrophe. It cannot reproduce itself. From a human perspective, this is the easiest plant to harvest. You can collect the entire seed head without losing most of the grain. The non-shattering plants were harvested. The shattering ones were not. Their seeds scattered and regrew naturally. Over many seasons, the harvested grain was brought back to the settlement, stored, and inevitably some of it fell and sprouted near where it was stored. The non-shattering trait was being selected for, not intentionally, not with any understanding of genetics, but through the simple logic of which plants were easiest to collect. Within a few thousand years, the wheat growing near human settlements was dramatically different from wild wheat. Larger seeds, non-shattering heads, higher yields, a plant that could no longer survive without human intervention. It needed to be harvested and replanted by human hands because it had lost the ability to scatter its own seeds. Humans had not planned to create a new plant, but they had. The same process happened with animals. The earliest domesticated animal was almost certainly the dog, descended from wolves that began following human groups, feeding on scraps, and gradually selecting for the individuals least afraid of humans. But food animals came next. Goats and sheep were domesticated in the Fertile Crescent around 10,000 years ago. Cattle followed, pigs. Each domestication followed a similar pattern. Wild animals that tolerated human proximity more than others were kept alive longer, fed, bred. The most docile survived. The most aggressive were eaten or driven away. Over generations, the animal population near human settlements became fundamentally different from the wild population. Again, not a plan, a pressure, and pressure, sustained long enough, becomes transformation. What is remarkable is that this happened in multiple places simultaneously with no connection between them. In China, around 9,000 years ago, rice and millet were being domesticated independently. In Mesoamerica, present-day Mexico, maize was domesticated from a wild grass called teosinte that barely resembles modern corn. In New Guinea, root crops. In sub-Saharan Africa, sorghum and millet. In each case, the process was the same: settlement, observation, unconscious selection, gradual transformation of wild species into domestic ones. The Earth did not have one agricultural revolution. It had many, separately, as if the conditions were right in multiple places at once, and the human brain, given similar pressures, arrived at similar solutions without ever comparing notes. But here is the part that requires real honesty. Early farming was not better than hunting and gathering. Not immediately, not obviously. The skeletal evidence from the transition period is clear. Early farmers were shorter than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. They had more bone disease, more dental decay, more nutritional deficiencies. They worked harder. Farming requires more daily labor than hunting and gathering in a productive environment. They ate a narrower diet. They were more vulnerable to famine when crops failed. They knew this, in some sense. They were not blind to what they were giving up. Hunter-gatherer groups that existed alongside early farming communities sometimes raided the farms rather than adopting farming themselves. They could see the comparison, and the comparison was not obviously in farming's favor. What farming offered was not a better life. It offered more people. A farming community could support significantly more people per square kilometer than a hunter-gatherer group. The population could grow, the surplus could be stored, and a community with stored surplus could do things a mobile group could not: build permanent structures, specialize labor, accumulate tools and knowledge across generations. The food was worse, the life was harder, but the number of people who could exist in one place was dramatically higher. And from that density came everything else. Writing, because you needed to count the stored grain. Mathematics, because you needed to divide the harvest. Government, because someone needed to manage the storage. Religion codified into temples, because temples were built on agricultural surplus. Cities, trade, civilization, all of it sitting on top of a mutation in a wheat plant that stopped its seeds from falling. Nobody planned it. Nobody saw where it was going. They were just trying to have enough to eat next season. Same problem, same brain, completely different world.